Welcome to the Illuminated Path podcast. I'm your host, Liv, founder of Eno Wellness Collective. My wellness journey started with yoga, which led me down the path of exploring healing modalities like meditation, breath work, sound healing, mindset work, and so much more. This exploration inspired my mission to help others find what lights them up. Get comfortable and curious as we learn from experts, teachers, and creators who are lighting up their communities and living an inspired, expansive life. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the Illuminated Path podcast, and so grateful today to get to record here in the beautiful Dusit Beach Resort penthouse. Beautiful ocean views, and I'm so excited to get to welcome to the show today, Dakota Camacho. You have been on my list to get on this show for a while, and so I'm so glad that the timing lined up this time, and so welcome to the show.
Yes. Yeah, it's great to be here.
You know, I know that when I first came across you and your work, I remember it very vividly because it was at the UOG Guam Green Growth conference, a sustainability conference. And I remember going to your breakout session. I believe that was the very first time we met. And I remember just leaving that breakout session being like, I have to meet him somehow. You know, I don't know if I don't think I went up to you at that time, but I was just so blown away by the work that you were sharing, your mission, your vision. I don't even know if at that point you had even fully moved home yet. But then I had invited you from there to be part of Eno Well Fest to come on and actually welcome and start the event. And both times I found myself like in tears at the beginning, at the end, just being like, this guy's powerful. You're sharing your message, you're sharing your mission. And so again, I'm so grateful to have you on. And I have so many questions for you because as I was sharing before we started, I don't know that much about your background, right? Pre getting to Guam, pre doing what you do now. And so I would love to start off with just hearing a little bit about just where you grew up, how you grew up, and what really led you to come back to Guam, which not many people, do move back at a later stage. So yeah, take us a little bit back to young Dakota.
Oh, beautiful. Again, thank you so much for having me here. And I want to begin actually by going all the way back before young me, and take a moment just to acknowledge the sacredness of being able to be here in this village of Tomhome. Seeing this view is just magnificent and connects me in particular because this is my ancestral village. This is the place where many generations of my ancestors have been. And I grew up in a CHamoru family that really took care of passing on the importance of who we are and what we've come here in this life to do. And my nana was a tetsa, and my papa was somebody who made sure that the CHamoru community knew each other, and that we actually used to go fishing together. We'd go clamming, crabbing, shrimping, fishing for salmon, and we would come together as a community and then split up the catch. And so I'm thinking about them in this moment and about this place and how they didn't get to spend the later part of their life here. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the U.S. military took the land from my nana, which led to their displacement and their eventual choice to migrate to Coast Salish territory. And I'm thinking about a teacher that I met there. His name is Squai Kwai. He's Swinomish Shwadab. And it just turns out, several years into our relationship, I find out that my nana and my papa migrated to his grandmother's ancestral village. And one of the things that he taught me was it's always good to acknowledge the spirit. It's always good to acknowledge the creator. So I know we didn't talk about this before, but I'm wondering, it would help me a lot, I think, in sharing this story, sharing a bit of who I am, if I would be able to make that acknowledgement with a lalai, with a chant.
Absolutely. I was hoping you would. I was like, I feel like it might come through on the conversation. Yes.
Well, this chant was composed by our late Setlu, Sidifuntun Jeremy Cepeda. And it was composed because the Zo'umti had come to him and asked him if he would write chants and prayers that we could use in ceremony. And one of the things that, we've been learning on this path is that every day is ceremony, and every moment is a ceremony as well. And so this song was composed to say, we come together today to give thanks and praise to the Creator, the Most High, for all the beautiful things that they have made. for our lives and for each other, for our ancestors and their words of wisdom, everything that exists and everything that was created for us, and so shall it be. And I want to offer this song to give thanks to the Creator, to give thanks to the ancestors of this land and of these waters, and thanks for all of the teachers that came before me, my family and the ones that have become my family. Because anything that I have of value to share really comes from trying my best to be a student of them. Queenie Pogu Natatuna Sia Saina Ida Hululu Nui Finatinos Nyasia Nui lina lota nui zahita. Nui manyai nata nui paota siha. Nui gwina hota. Tan hokuku kadzuniha. Nagwahodzi Taigwena Mo.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Mahasi. So your question was about taking us back to little me, right?
Mhm.
So I grew up in Coast Salish territory in the lands of the Swinomish, Swadab, Dok, the Obsh, Snohomish, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish peoples. And I grew up in a large Chamorro family with a huge extended Chamorro family. I didn't know that the place that I grew up, which the best that I can do with the pronunciation, and I'm not exactly sure about it, the island is Sakwalechi in the Lashutsi language. But at the moment, we know it as Whidbey Island. And I didn't know that the town that I grew up in was actually 90% white because I was immersed in a Chamorro community, and we had fiestas, we had novenas. We always had food when people would come over. And so a lot of the things that I've learned about Chamorro people who grew up here, I really resonate with
Mhm.
because I got to have those experiences. My family had a cultural dance group in the 90s that played a big part in making me feel connected to home. My nana had these shells on her rattan shelves that she had. And my auntie would tell me to pick up the shell and hold it to my ear, and so I could hear home.
Mm.
So home always felt really close and also kind of bizarrely far away, right? We were dancing to these songs that spoke about a reality that I never knew about, on the island of Guam, there are coconut trees. I had never seen a coconut tree before. Um, and as I grew older, my Chamorro family started to kind of fall apart a little bit. My nana and papa passed away, and we were just up against a lot. I think the impact of racism and settler colonialism on our minds and our understandings of who we are, and also just what we faced in this Navy town, was really difficult for folks. And so I share, without a whole lot of shame, sadness for sure, but without shame because I know that it's not my family's fault. But we come from a family where we experience domestic violence and sexual violence, drug abuse, addiction. Um, I had a number of cousins that ended up in prison,
Mhm.
and that all of that was very confusing while getting these messages about, being American, which I never felt like was really who I am.
Mm.
And so I was very lucky that I had a history teacher that taught us about colonialism and kind of got me asking more questions about who we are. And I think I ended up on the very, probably the first few years of Guampedia, researching, who are we before the Spanish came. And at that point, I started to write poetry. I was inspired by a form of Chamorro poetry called Mali'i. At that time, I knew it as Cantan Samarita. And I was inspired because the things that they said about our ancestors were that we did wonders. It was like we did magic. We could create fireworks with our words. And so I used that time of writing as an attempt to listen to my ancestors. And it brought me into an understanding of ceremony and ritual and spirituality that was already cultivated within me. I was the only young person that I knew that had a rosary table. I had an altar in my room. I said the rosary every night. So, of course, spiritual practice was always very important to me. But understanding what that meant in the wake of my Nana and Papa passing away, of my family kind of not being able to figure out how to stay connected with all of the pressures that we were up against, and with this pressure to become American when it felt like it meant losing so much of myself. So I was just very lucky that we ended up moving to Seattle and having mentors from the south end of Seattle and from the central district of Seattle that I learned about who I am as a Tomoru through the lens of hip hop, through being in connection with Black people and Black culture, and then also all of the different communities that Black culture and Black people had influenced around building international liberation movements, using our culture as the medium and the message. So I started organizing hip hop shows and at a Eritrean restaurant, which we would say was a community center disguised as a restaurant. At the Hidmo, which was a restaurant started by two Eritrean sisters, Rahwa Apte and Esmeret. Rahwa is now on the other side. So I just wanted to honor her for a moment, as well as Jeremy. But the space that they created with the restaurant uh, was a place where so much culture got to thrive, so many different kinds of peoples. The area code that I grew up in the later half of my teens was the most diverse in the country. And so I had this very interesting experience as a Chamorro, not having many Chamorros around at that part of my life, coming from being surrounded by Chamorros, but then being surrounded by so many different kinds of cultures and expressions, but also histories and people who were trying to understand, how did my family end up here? How is what's happening in our homeland impacting us today? And how can we do something to try and repair and transform these conditions? And so I was just really blessed to be raised in a community like that.
Yeah. I mean, fascinating. I didn't know that part about your story. And I know I've seen some of your musical influences and how it's all woven together alongside the poetry, the chanting, the rapping, like really bringing that all the different cultural influences into the mix. It sounds like you've also had some really important teachers along the way, whether they were mentors, obviously family members, or just people who have, by meeting them, your path then expands. So tell me a little bit about who you point back, in your life up to now as like your biggest teachers, biggest inspirations.
Yeah, I mean, my Nana and Papa,
Yeah.
first and foremost, my whole family, my parents. My mom is such a loving human being. My dad,
Yeah.
my sister Deanne, my older sister, she's about 10 years older than me. So I learned a lot about feminism as a young boy, which I think was very important. My twin sister. And then when we moved to Seattle, uh, I got mentored through You Speak Seattle. So El Dia, Rogue Panay, I'm just listing names now, which feels like a kind of meditation in itself. It's like almost like a navigation chant. Gabriel Teodros, Khalil Akiano, Abyssinian Creole, of course, the Hidmo. Um, so many individual peoples and communities. And I'm thinking about Anik Bai in Seattle, Gabriella, Joanne Alcantara. This is, I don't even know if this makes sense to be naming it all like this because, but I don't know. Look people up.
Yeah.
um, yeah. I mean, I feel like part of the, you're asking about teachers, and there are some specific ones that maybe I'll talk about in a little bit, but I, one of the things that I learned in that part of my early life is that the community is the teacher, you know, and all of these different connections, everybody has something to share, something for us to grow from, especially in a community that I grew up in where there's so many different kinds of experiences. Um, One of them that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast is Squai Quai, and he's an elder that I got to meet because I was doing Chamorro cultural work, and I was asking a question of, you know, here we always ask for permission before we go into the jungle, and we wanted to do a ceremony out there in Coast Salish territories, and so I asked, like, well, who do we ask permission from? You know, the ancestors, absolutely, and there's also living people, and that led to us having a very profound relationship. And one of the things that he taught me, uh, that just kind of crystallized the things that I learned earlier in life was that all of the wisdom that we seek, the healing that we seek, is within our language and our culture. And it's our work to figure out how to wake up our relationship to that once again.
Mm.
And so I learned so much from him, from because he shared his wisdom, of the Coast Salish life ways, and he shared it with a very particular intention, which is not for us to adopt what he taught us about who he is, but for us to figure out how these teachings and how this wisdom is alive inside of our language and culture. And that played a huge role in the rest of my life and still to this day.
Beautiful. So it sounds like you had a strong, Chamorro family, Chamorro culture, influence at a very young age. Then you had a lot of different influences that came and taught you and sort of formed, you know, a lot of the work that you do today. But then there was the actually coming here, right? And coming to
Hmm.
Guam, which I know you had mentioned before we pressed play. I believe you were 11 when you came here for the first time.
It was
Or
2011 and I was
2011.
20.
2011 and 20.
Yeah.
And so that first time that you came here, and then now the decision to move to be here,
Hmm.
what was that turning point for you? And what was it like to even come here?
Mm. Well, the part of why I came is because what I was reading about where our people are at
Mhm.
with the military buildup, with the threats to our ecosystem, to our culture, and to our language, I knew that I wanted to be a part of shifting that reality. And I didn't know how, but I knew that being home was going to guide me.
Mhm.
And it was so gorgeous because when I first landed, my auntie was driving me around, and I felt like I knew exactly where we were going. Things felt so familiar, you know, and also so different. It was so clear to me that that I was culturally different as much as I was culturally similar. But it was clear that there was a lot of stark differences between how I understood the world at that time and how things were here. So it was a very humbling experience, a lot of learning. I encountered some really beautiful teachers along the way and made some really incredible friendships. And I think that those relationships is really at the core of who we are as Tomoto people, and also at the core of any work. It transforms me because I felt finally connected to this place that I knew in my bones, but I couldn't express.
Mhm.
You know, I didn't have memories from my lifetime of this bay that I called home,
Mm.
right? And I had a lot of questions about things that my family either didn't want to talk about, or questions that I wish that I could have asked my grandparents before they passed away, things that I didn't know how to ask people about. I wanted to learn the language,
Mm.
you know, and so I spent that year being really committed to that. And I was very lucky to meet Siddharth and Jeremy Cepeda on that journey, and also have aunties that were willing to have me sit down with them and try my best to fumble around with a little bit of Tomorrow I was learning. And they would Cassie me, but they would also encourage me, you know, and also before I came home, I had spent some time with El Movimiento Chicano de Atzlan, which is Mecha, it's a Chicano student movement. And so I had kind of picked up Spanish by being around people. So I learned something about learning languages as well, around kind of trying to let go of some of the embarrassment and the shame. And I think that was really helpful
Mm.
when I came back.
You're actually one of the only people that I know or here, that I've met in our age range that does fully speak Chamorro. I'm sure that there are a lot of other people that do, but I remember at the first, Wellfest that you were part of in the beginning, you spoke and kind of opened up in Chamorro, and I remember someone looking over and be like, "Wow, like he fully speaks Chamorro," and that was a surprise, right? Because of what our generation experiences, how we experience culture, language, passing on certain traditions. And so and you had mentioned you decided to come home because you wanted to be part of the movement and the work that was here. So when you think about what that looks like for you, kind of the early seeds of your work now, what does activism mean for you, and how do you? Because everyone has their own version and way that they
Mm.
contribute, right? But for you, what does that activism look like?
So I'm pausing for a moment because I'm reminded of a teaching that was shared with me by Squai Kwai, where he actually asked us to stop thinking about ourselves as activists. Um, and I think part of it is that he really encouraged us to let go of the political realities and the Western constructs, and to dive into an understanding of, what would this mean from our indigenous perspective. And the more that I've been considering my understanding of that, the more I realize that so much of how I've been guided in my life, from my sisters and the movement that I grew up in to end gender-based violence, um, and the movement for collective liberation. It really is a movement for us to get to be able to breathe and be together in a safe and healthy environment.
Mm.
And so when I think about what that means for me as someone who, lives here in this place that is constantly under attack and in a world where there are systems that are set up to try and confuse us into disunity and confuse us into disrespecting and treating each other and the earth and the waters as not sacred. I think that for me, the work is to recover the ancestral intelligence, the ancestral knowing, and to learn again how to strengthen our relationships to our ancestors and to the wisdom that's within our language and within our culture. Because all of that, and I think this is true for every human being, for most of human existence, human cultures, no matter who you are, whether you're CHamoru from Micronesia or you're from Africa or Turtle Island or Europe, we all come from earth-based cultures. And somewhere along the way, we got confused and started dominating one another.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that the work is really about the recovery of that.
Mhm.
So we can rebuild our societies in ways that don't damage one another and don't damage that which gives us life.
Definitely. I feel that a lot with a lot of the work that I do around wellness, and even just coming home wanting to understand, like, what are the traditional practices, right? What did our ancestors do? What do we need to remember and have this sort of return and remembrance for that maybe has been lost along the way? And even when I moved home, I noticed, like, as I was starting to have some of those conversations, like, it was a little bit unclear, or maybe there was certain practices that were kept a little bit more private, or, obviously passed down in certain families, but really understanding that, like, the land holds so much for us to learn already,
Mm.
right? And that it's like this return back to that sense of like inner knowing.
Hmm.
So when you think about, I guess the Chamorro values, what you really connect to the most when you think about our culture and just like keeping it alive in our generation, is there a value or like a part of the culture that you feel like you really resonate and like use as a guide?
Inafa Maulik,
Mm.
you know, um, the the wisdom of making things good for all living beings. It's the core of who I am. I think in the early 2010s, I was composing a rap song while walking through uh, south end of Seattle, and the words that came to me is that all life is sacred. So I think I part of what I've been trying to explore is how do I um, understand every expression of that, you know? And the interesting thing for me is that, you know, everything that I learn about our language and culture is interconnected.
Mhm.
So there's inafamalit, there's also inagofli'i, right? To see the goodness in one another and in all things. There's also, I love to think about hafa adai, the old way of saying hafa day. Hafa adai comes from like, what's up? Hafa adahi. What's up? The one who looks after me and who I look after. And it's that essence of reciprocity. Um, I think about mahgung, which is peacefulness, which comes from this in the interpretation that I've been taught, mahagung, to have breathe. You know, there's so much actually inside of our language and culture, um, and I think that they weave into one another. I think maybe if I was to say that there's one thing that's guiding me, I think it's just I shouldn't say just. I would say that it's knowing that there's a wisdom that is so deep and so profound that if we can just keep staying on this path of trying to know, we'll figure out how to take a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Yes, and when I look at you, I definitely see you as an expander, and I see you as someone that, when I think of us as, again, someone in our generation that is really connected to the culture, the language, who is passing it on, who is like wise beyond your years. Like you come to mind number one, and I'm sure for a lot of people who know you, that as well. But I also know that there's a lot of other people that, maybe have moved back to Guam after being away, or don't live on Guam but are in a Chamorro family out in, we were talking about like the hubs around the US, or people who are, half Chamorro and half something else, or not Chamorro, but have lived here their whole life, right? There's such a mix, like melting pot here. So for people listening that are wanting to connect to their Chamorro roots, whether they're Chamorro or not, right? Whether all those little, examples I gave, what would you say are some ways that people can just start to reconnect in this modern, society to the Chamorro culture?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that, I really appreciate all these kind words that you're saying about me. And I just want to own that as much as you are being so generous in your words, I still feel like I have so much to learn. I think that I know very, very little, to be honest. But I appreciate that you see that there's something that I have to offer. And again, I just want to thank, my teachers. And I think that would be the starting point for anyone. Who are the teachers in your family, and who can you stay connected with, that you're close to. I think learning happens really well when we're deeply connected. Sometimes those relationships are not always doing the best, so we have to figure out how to tend to those. Um, and then, of course, I think one of the things that we've learned on this journey is this concept of hinalum. Hinalum is your intuition, your senses, and your feelings, and then there's the word for to create is nathuzung, to push it out,
Mm,
right? So it kind of teaches us that there's this idea that creation comes from connecting into the intuition,
mm,
and I would say that is a really good place to start. You know, and that is pretty much how I was instructed when I first came here.
mm,
I was told, go and pray, go into the land and connect with the land and ask the ancestors, the benevolent ancestors, ask the enlightened ancestors for guidance. And, as long as I've done that, I've been guided in a good way, and I've learned some really good things.
mm. So tell us a little bit about your work with, I know you just came off a really exciting project.
Mhm.
You have a lot. I always see you in many different capacities and organizations. And so tell us a little bit about how you're bringing your work to life these days.
Yeah, thanks so much. So in 2020, sometimes I don't know if it's 2020 or 2019, but si Defuntun Jeremy Cepeda and I started this organization called Matan.
Mhm.
And Di Matanggumat means the face of the house, the front of the house, where everybody is welcome to join, to see what's happening. It's traditionally where ceremonies happen for the entire village, where knowledge is shared, where debates and conversation happen in order to bring everybody into the collective process of governing ourselves. It speaks to something that you just talked about a second ago about how, sometimes knowledge has gone into hiding or into the house or into the family, right? And so we started this organization because we realized that it's time to start bringing that knowledge back out to the front of the house.
Mhm.
That part of the oppression that's been put on our peoples is for us to hide and to be ashamed of who we are.
Mhm.
And that's had a bunch of different negative impacts. And one of them is, of course, on our language.
Yep.
People have been made to feel ashamed or been made to feel stupid for having a Chamorro accent. And now, in this moment where all of a sudden being Chamorro is kind of becoming cool or trendy, it's almost like the opposite. If you don't have a Chamorro enough accent, then you can be made fun of. Um, and so this space is meant to say everybody is welcome, everybody belongs, everybody has a gift to contribute
Mhm.
in order for us to create an Afamaulik.
Right.
And so our work is multifaceted.
Mhm.
We have a chant group that is gone through different waves of being quite strong and regular, and then we've had a season, especially with the passing of Si Defuntun Jeremy, where we've taken some time off, but we're just starting that up again,
Mhm.
and so we're gonna be having our weekly chant sessions for people to come and learn the chants that have been composed and help us understand the traditional role of chanting in our community, of how it's used as prayer, as a form of communication to the ancestors, to the spirits. And spirituality is really at the core of what we do in Gumatan Gumat, whether it be, learning the language and creating opportunities for us to share what we know and to learn more, whether it be the creative practices that we have created or want to create. Bringing artists together has also been a core of what we do, because we know that artists, we have a practice of placing ourselves into the flow of creation, and that creation flow, that sacredness, is what it is that we're hoping to bring out more of in who we are and our understanding of who we are. This week at the collaboratory, one of the participants had shared that they're very grateful for Dimat and Gumat because they had the honor of traveling to different indigenous communities, and they would be asked, oh, this is the opening protocol. Is there a song that you would like to offer? And they talked about feeling a little bit lost and not really being sure what to offer. But because of their experiences with us, they've had some time to learn about, what is a sense of Chamorro protocol,
Mm.
what is a sense of Chamorro ceremony, and how do we share that with others.
Right.
And so that's a big part of what we do as well.
Yeah, and I'm super grateful to have come into contact with your work because there is so much synergy, right? When you're talking about creativity, when you're talking about cultural connection, even the intuition, like wellness and taking care of ourselves is a huge piece of the puzzle,
Mm.
especially for the creative channel to be activated and be open. And I always think about the people here on Guam that are really committed to change and committed to moving the community forward. It has to start from within, right? It has to start from taking care of our own channels. And so super appreciative of all the work that you've done. And seeing this last collaboratory, is that what you mentioned the name is, just how you're bringing together this community of people who are ready to like
Mhm.
bring their message forward. So
Mm.
super beautiful, that you get to share your work in this way. Okay, so as we close up, I do want to ask you, when you think about, I mentioned about, our generation feeling more connected to the Chamorro culture, but when you just think of your own, where you're at right now, the age that you're at right now, the season in your life that you're at right now, when you look ahead of like how you see your work evolving, what you're kind of seeing on that vision board for what comes next with Gimat and Guma, or also just personally, what comes up for you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I want to raise a family. Yeah. I want to raise children that speak the language, that practice the culture. Um, and so one thing I haven't shared yet on this podcast is that I also am queer, and so figuring out what that means for me, I'm not sure yet. Um, Connected to that, wanting to raise a family is wanting to raise a family that's connected with other families that are committed to this cultural work. And so for a long time, I have been seeing on the horizon that we are building an intentional CHamoru community, that we're living together on the land with each other. We're growing our own food. If we need power, we're generating it in ethical and loving ways that have the least amount of negative impact on the environment and on the earth. And we're educating our young people by living our culture.
Yeah.
And that's what I see. Uh, it's speaking, you're talking about being in the wellness space. I mean, to me, our culture is wellness.
Mhm.
To be well is what our ancestors have always wanted for us, because wellness is enough,
Mhm.
you know? And so to create a place where we can figure out, you know, with everything that's been put on us, all of this confusion about how to be in right relationship with ourselves and with each other, how can we figure out how to do this again,
Mhm.
with the wisdom of our ancestors carrying us? And that's what I want to be a part of.
Yes. You are the embodiment of this, right? Like, it's not just walking the walk. You are walking the walk. You are speaking the language. You are thinking about the future, thinking about how to pass it on to the next generation. And we need more Dakotas in the world. So I just want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. There's so many bits of that I didn't know, and that I have so much deep respect for you and your work. And I know the Ina community is going to be loving this episode and this conversation. So thank you.
Si just mossy.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please rate and review, and don't forget to subscribe. Learn more at InoWellnessCollective.com and connect with us on Instagram at InoWellnessCollective.